Thank you very much for joining us today for talking about Fraxion and Endeavour Solutions for PO, AP, and expense automation, also known as spend management. My name is Scott Jorgens. I'm from Endeavour Solutions, Director of Marketing here, and on the line with us is Scott Pape from Fraxion, and we'll go over a few quick introductions, and then I'll pass it over to Scott to talk about an introduction to Fraxion, features, ROI, and a demo in connection to Dynamics GP in a similar fashion to how it would connect with other Microsoft Dynamics applications. Drum roll, please. Endeavour is now in its 30th year working with Microsoft Dynamics, originally Great Plains, and continuing to expand our consulting practice with Microsoft Dynamics NAV and Business Central, as well as our CRM team and our cloud team working with Azure and Office 365. 3 lines of business: advisory services, implementation and upgrades, and ongoing optimization and support. We now have over 550 clients across Canada and the United States, offices in Toronto, Halifax, Montreal, London, Edmonton, and Ottawa. So we've looked at this slide a few times on past webinars, taking GP being predominantly an on-premise software or Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central, which is a cloud-based ERP that can also be hosted on-premise. Either way, surrounding your ERP applications with a variety of cloud applications, outsourcing to Canadian payroll or US payroll, Office 365 in the cloud, third-party applications to do bigger, better, faster, and that's where Fraxion comes in. And other applications that are cloud-based for BI, CRM, and complementing your systems. So we're looking at Fraxion for Microsoft Dynamics, a variety of features and functions, and let me pass it over to Scott Pape to introduce himself and continue on with our demo and discussion today. Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the invitation from Endeavour. Again, my name is also Scott. I'm Scott Pape. I'm with Fraxion. Our company's been in business for about 20 years, and we've been working with Microsoft Dynamics GP as well as other Dynamics applications, including Business Central, and we're a Microsoft Gold Certified partner. We have many customers in common with Endeavour Solutions as well as other Dynamics GP customers that utilize our Fraxion spend management solution. So our solution, Fraxion, is a spend management system, so it helps companies provide better internal controls over their purchasing workflow, their AP invoice processes, as well as potentially their expense reports. Those are 3 different areas of expense management. On one hand, getting pre-approval to spend money with a purchase requisition, allowing people to make a request to purchase, and alternatively, there are also requests to pay bills that can be done for those check requests that need to be approved before payment. Our solution has been in utilization over the years by over 1,000 organizations worldwide, tens of thousands of end users on the platform. Our company Fraxion rebranded in the last year. About a year ago, we rebranded with eRequester. eRequester was formerly the name of our solution, and under the new branding, we're calling it Fraxion E. We have an on-premise option as well as a cloud solution, and both alternatives provide companies with great controls over spending integrated with Dynamics GP, and should you go to Business Central, that will also be available. Our solution is a cross-industry system. It helps companies in various industries and sectors control their purchasing workflow and their spending. Very much everybody has to pay the bills, so any company with Dynamics GP looking to control their spending through an easy-to-use interface and also flexible approval workflow and other great options are good candidates for the solution. The integration with Dynamics GP provides for exceptional elimination of redundant data entries and provides for a great ROI as part of the process. Companies that we have are in various industries, like I mentioned, but also just some sample of representative clients so you can have an idea of the different customers that we have in various verticals. Very much great system for like gaming, for education. There's a lot of colleges and universities that use the solution, healthcare, hospitals, as well as financial services and professional services companies are using the solution. Among the things that the system is looking to address are eliminating or reducing challenges companies have in connection with spending. For example, if you have paper-based requisitioning processes or after the fact approvals to spend and you're looking to get better pre-approval, people not being notified when they have to take action or stuff sitting in somebody's inbox indefinitely, lack of insights into budgets, maverick spending. A lot of these bullet points you can see identified here are typical challenges that we are looking to address with the solution. Among the great features and benefits of Fraxion include a nice online request to spend interface. So people who want to spend money or buy something can initiate a request or potentially a reimbursement type of request. And then ultimately you can route it for approval and it notifies relevant people when they have to take action. And those approval rules can be based on different parameters such as like the dollar amount, the department, the type of request. It sends out email notifications to alert you when you have action items. And from the email you can click a link and log in and approve, or there's even an option to approve it from the email without having to log into the system, so your managers on the go can approve or reject from their smartphones from their email. All this provides greater compliance with various auditing protocols. There's a nice audit trail in the transaction history that shows a date and timestamp for when you create and submit requests and who approved them, along with any comments. And the comment feature provides for better collaboration so you can communicate about the status of your transactions, status of the orders, the status of the payments, and that communication is something that is all captured in the history so that people aren't wondering and calling the accounting department to find out when the vendor's going to get paid, etc. All this saves a tremendous amount of labor as well as time and money, typically resulting in a great ROI for companies. And of course, the integration with Dynamics GP means that you don't have to rekey the data into the financial system. You just, the system automatically will create vouchers into AP once the AP department approves the invoice, or creates the purchase orders into the purchase order processing module once the requisition's been approved. It's all controlled, and you don't have to maintain vendors and GL codes and items in two separate systems due to that integration. With that said, I believe at this stage I'm going to actually pull up the system and give you a quick tour of our Fraxion E solution. With that said, I'm navigating to my browser, and you can see at this stage that I've launched a web browser, and keeping in mind that it's browser-based so that you can use Chrome or Firefox or Safari or Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge and browse to the login screen. This can be on-premise or it can be in the cloud depending on which version we decide to go with. There's various pros and cons, and ultimately we'd be glad to have that conversation about the options. So when you log into the system, you can choose which company you would like to work in, and it's a multi-company solution, so you can have multiple entities. It works with binary stream multi-entity management if you happen to be using that inside of Dynamics GP, and also you can have each Fraxion company connected to a corresponding Dynamics company. I've logged into my solution as this gentleman named Joe Requester. By virtue of his permissions in the system, he's presented with his dashboard where he can see any transactions that are currently in progress. He made some requests previously. These are all requests to spend money, to buy stuff, or to pay a bill, depending on the type of request. And he's got 10 of those currently in progress. Each request has a number that the system will assign for internal tracking purposes. You can call that a requisition number or a request number, a transaction number. And then, moreover, there's something called a friendly name, a title. You can give a reference to your request, for example, monthly supplies or computer equipment. And that's just a name to go with the assigned number. Check request for services. There's also in the dashboard a column for the vendor, the supplier. Who do you want to buy it from? Who do you have to pay? And automatically the Dynamics GP vendors are populated, so the users can just only see the approved vendors. There's also a way to get new vendors requested and approved. We have a great feature in addition on the middle column there called request type. The solution allows you to categorize different types of requests, so you can distinguish, for example, purchase requests that are just ordinary standard operating expenses versus capital expenditure requests. So standard requests might go to the department manager, whereas CapEx needs to go to the finance department. Computer-related IT requests need to go to the IT department. Invoices for utilities, those might just bypass purchase orders altogether and create approved vouchers into payables. So by categorizing different request types, you can set workflow up to drive these requests to the right people under the right conditions, and also even create the right transaction as a purchase order as opposed to an invoice. We also have visibility over the status, so a user can see where it is in the process. If you initiate a request, it starts out incomplete because you started creating the details of the transaction, and then once you submit, it notifies an approver and it goes into a status of waiting, which means it's waiting for approval. And that person will have been notified, and you could even see who it is that the request is waiting on. So this requisition number 6332 is waiting on Manager Bob to take action, whereas the transaction down below, the invoice for utilities, is waiting for the accounts payable person, Happy. So right here in our dashboard, we have a bird's eye view of what's currently in progress that's been submitted and not yet fully ordered or paid, and it's all listed there in my requests queue in my dashboard. If you have something to approve yourself because somebody sent it to you, it'll be in your pending approval tab where you can see anything that's pending your approval. There's also a receiving tab where you can see any open purchase orders that have been created, that you've created, ultimately your requests that have been approved and are ready to be ordered. The system supports centralized purchasing where you have a buyer at your company or multiple buyers. And it also supports decentralized purchasing where you don't have purchasing departments, but people need to buy stuff. But before they buy it, it needs to be approved. So by having a system that allows for that, it eliminates necessarily having a purchasing department. It also supports it if you have it. But people can just ultimately buy after it's been approved if they've got rights. And this guy, Joe, has 22 open POs in his receiving tab, and each one has a purchase order number that was assigned once the requisition was approved. It's cross-referenced with the requisition, and these have either been ordered but not received, or they possibly been partially received but not fully received because it supports back-ordered items, or fully received but still open because it hasn't been invoiced and paid yet. Ultimately, these get closed once everything gets invoiced and the transactions are changed to a closed status. We could drill into any of these transactions to look at the details, and I should point out as well that the solution Fraxion E integrates with Dynamics GP's purchase order processing module. If you have it, if you're using it, Alternatively, we can bypass purchase order processing inside of Dynamics GP and just keep all the purchase orders, receiving transactions, and invoices here inside Fraxion, and we can feed the invoices over to payables management. So it works with direct feed to payables management, bypassing purchase order, or if you're using purchase order and inventory inside of GP, it integrates with purchase order and inventory and receiving in GP. Those are two different flows that can be done depending on the company, whether you're indirect spending or if it's direct spending. Lots of good options available in that area. There's also a templates tab where you can generate or create what we call templates, and those are essentially saved requisitions, things that you order on a regular basis where you just want to pull up a template, copy it into a new order, add additional details like the quantities and other, maybe unique requests, and then you can submit that request that was created from a template. This guy happens to have a number of templates in his templates tab, and if he wants to use one of these, he can just highlight it and then click the copy button. And when you copy a template, it will replicate it into a brand new transaction. In this case, I've successfully copied the template. The system has assigned a new requisition number, in this case 6383, and the user can put in the quantities for any of these items for which he would like to requisition today. So each item that was on my template got saved, it got listed anyhow, and if I want to just put in a couple of quantities here on any of these, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So maybe I'll buy 150 of those and 40 of those and 10 of those. And you don't have to put quantities for every line. You can just put quantities for the ones you'd like to requisition today. You can update the delivery date requested as well as the vendor if needed. And when you hit save, it's just going to save the items for which you've entered quantity. It will automatically remove lines that are left at 0 quantity. So it navigates to the review screen, and now you can see all the details on this transaction. So this was a template where it automatically recognized that this is Joe who's making the request. His preferred vendor here is Advanced Office Systems because that's the vendor that was on his template. And the request type is a standard request from the default department that he has been put into, operations. And the line items that were included are the 3 items for which he'd entered quantity, and you can see the quantity entered there that he put in. We had a default cost, a standard cost set up for those items. That could also pull the last cost from Dynamics GP if that's set up. And then you can see the extended total here of $5,520 US with the requested ship date of December 3rd. If I need to change anything, I can change anything. I can click on any of these items here and it will drill into item entry, and I could edit the quantity or the cost, or even pick a different item, or I could add another item if it wasn't on my template. I could edit. There's also a little drill down into the item detail. So if I expand the item detail, you can see the expense account, the distribution. And in this case, you could see I have charged this bond paper to the miscellaneous expense account, and each line gets coded to a default GL code. There's a lot of features related to coding these transactions. You can have it defaulted, you can have it a restricted list for the user to pick from, you can have what's called a GL override or segment substitution. It also will warn you if it's going to put you over the budget. So this red exclamation point is a warning that, hey, you don't have any money left in your budget for this account code. And it looks at the GP general ledger budgets, and it will compare this $14 line item to the amount remaining on your budget. And it turns red if it's going to put you over. This assumes you're using budgets in GP at the general ledger account code level. If you're not, that's okay. We could turn this off. If you want to use this, we could turn it on. And then when you click on the GL code itself, it runs a report that shows you for that particular budget how much per period and for the fiscal year did you budget. So in this case, I didn't budget anything for this expense account. there's $0 budget, but it shows me how much I actually spent. I've spent $128,000, and it reads that from the GP's general ledger. It also shows me how much I've committed on purchase orders, how much is currently outstanding, open, forecasted to be spent based on open POs. Those are going to be purchase orders that are living inside of Fraxion. Or if you're using the Dynamics GP purchase order processing module, it pulls the commitments from there rather than from our own tables. It also shows any requisitions that are pending. So just because it hasn't been ordered yet doesn't mean I don't need to know about it. If somebody made a request and submitted it, it's pending approval. And if it gets approved, we're going to have to pay for it. So therefore, that calculation gets included. Actuals plus committed plus pending commitments equals the total compared to the budget. And then it shows you the variance, how much I'm over or under per period or for the fiscal year. And you can have this red exclamation point and this warning if it's going to be over for the year, for the month, for the quarter, or for year to date. Any of those options are available for the warning. And you could even have it go to more people for approval if it's over budget. You could have a hard stop that says, sorry, try again next year. So there's some good alternatives for keeping track of your budgets versus your spend and your requested spend. There's also the ability to attach any kind of supporting documents to the transaction. So if you have a contract, a picture, a specification, you can upload any backup that might need to be attached to the transaction. 3 quotes from a vendor, a spec sheet. I'll just go ahead and attach a quote here, for example. So you can upload a quote. You can upload any number of quotes. There's also even a request for quote module, and you can create RFQs and send those out to vendors. Usually companies with centralized purchasing will like to do that. I just attached a couple of documents here. I've got a quote and then quote number 2 just for reference, and that just shows you're doing some due diligence so that when I make this $5,500 request to buy these items, my boss, my manager will see that I've done some due diligence. You can add notes into the notes field. You can hit continue, and it will tell you if anybody needs to review and approve this request before it's allowed to be purchased. Depending on your company's workflow and approval process, your delegation of authority, the system will be set up and tell you who it needs to go to. My company, my demo company here, is configured so that if Joe makes a request and it's over his authority, it needs to go to the manager of his department. And then if it's over budget, it also has to go to the director of finance. And then once she approves it, it goes to the purchasing coordinator, Bill. And he's the guy in my company that does the ordering. Now this is extremely flexible in the system, so we don't have to use this particular approach, but these rules can be driven based on very flexible parameters that you can define in the administration. And you can set that up and maintain that yourselves after we show you the basics. So maybe I add a little note here that we are out of these supplies and need to reorder. So you put some justification. You can carbon copy any other user in the system if you just like to notify them as an FYI. And when you hit submit, it will notify by email the first person in the approval chain. As you might recall, that's the supervisor, the manager, Bob, who got notified. And Joe has been navigated back to his dashboard, and he sees that this requisition 6383 has now been submitted for approval, and this supplies request, it's in a status of waiting. It's waiting for manager Bob to take action. So Joe's come in, copied a template, added some quantities, attached some backup, submitted, and then he can log out. So he did the basics. He could create a requisition from scratch without a template and walk through a few steps. I'm going to skip that for now and just kind of move along to the approval stage of this particular transaction. So Bob is the manager. what happened is he actually gets an email. So if I check my email, I go to my inbox, and I'm going to have to just go up to the top of my email here. If you just let me scroll, you can see there's a notification, and I'm going to double click on that. So that just came in right here and now, and it says, hey Bob, your approval is required from the Endeavour Solutions eRequester, Fraxion eRequester company. And it alerts this person that there's details here for him to review. He could click on the link in the email and it will take him right into the system. Alternatively, he could look at the details within the body of the email. It has the header and the line item information right there in the email, all nicely detailed. And there's even these options to approve or reject from the email without having to log in at all. He can approve, reject. He could ask for more information or for changes. If he wants to click the little link in the email, that's an option. And notice the attachments even carry forward in the email, so you can look at the backup if desired. If he wants to log in, however, he would go ahead and click the link, or just log in through the desktop, and it will detect if he has a mobile device or if he's using his computer. And if it's a mobile device, it'll automatically give him a mobile approval interface. I'm going to go ahead and show you that. Let's log in as Bob, approver for this particular request. And when he logs in through his smartphone web browser, I'm going to go ahead and shrink my screen a little bit so you can see it in a kind of a mobile-friendly view. I've logged in as this manager Bob Manager here, and because I'm using my mobile approval feature, it takes me to the pending approval tab, where I can see I have 4 requests currently pending my approval, and the one that we were just working on is right on top. And if I were to drill into that particular transaction, you can see this request 6383 for monthly supplies with the justification that we just included. The 3 line items are listed there. It turns red because it warns him that it's over budget. You don't have the full featured site through the mobile interface, like the full budget report's not available. You'd have to go into the full site to see that and some other features. But this provides most of the basics, if not all the basics, for this person to see quickly the details of this transaction and to take appropriate action on it. So this was created by Joe. It was submitted about 2 minutes ago, and it was routed for approval. So that history is available. The attached documents were included. If he wants to look at the line item details, he can go ahead and click on the line items, look at the quantity costs, the coding, and he could scroll through the item details, and ultimately can take action, whether it be approve or reject or otherwise. I'll just go ahead and say this is fine with me and hit approve, and that will indicate it has indeed been successfully approved. And he can go ahead now, and if he wants, he can work on his other transactions, or he can log out and go back to what he was doing previously. So that's how an approver gets notified, clicks the link, reviews and approves from their mobile web browser. If I want to now just check my email again, you'll see that the next person got a notification. So then the director got emailed that it's now her turn to look at this, whereas the requisitioner, Joe, got notified that that his requisition has been partially approved. And it keeps the requester in the loop. So he sees that Bob had approved it, and next up is the director. Let's go ahead and just log in right through the desktop. She's sitting at her desk on her computer, and she's going to log in, and it'll take her to her dashboard because she didn't click the URL in the email. I've logged in as Jane. She's my finance director in the Endeavour Solutions company, and she has 6 requests, 6 transactions currently pending her approval. Each one is listed here. She sees the monthly supplies request that's currently waiting for her approval. It got sent to her at November 26th, today's date, and it was requested by Joe. She's got some other ones sitting here There is an out-of-office delegation feature. If you want to mark yourself as out of office, it'll go to your delegate. There's also a proxy approval feature that will allow other people to take proper action on bottlenecked requests. You can also expand the item detail from the dashboard and look at the GL codes. You could look at the items. You could look at the attached documents, or you could actually click this view button and it will drill into the review screen, the full review screen. I went ahead and drilled into the review screen, and this person now is looking at the transaction, and we could see that the operations department here is asking for those 3 items for $5,520. If for some reason she needs to recode it to a different expense account, she can edit the GL account here and correct it, because she has authority to do so in her permissions in her profile. She can also confirm the shipping and everything else looks good. She could check the budget if desired. And there's also the ability to add a comment. This is over budget. Try again next year, and she could reject it if she wants to. Or she could be a little bit softer and say, okay, fine with me. Whatever her desired communication is can be entered there. What's nice about these comments is they get added to this history below. So notice the manager, Bob, his comment that it was fine with him got included. And that will be just important for ongoing communication to see who said what along the way in case you need to make any adjustments. And you could also see that this transaction is currently pending the director's final approval before it goes to the purchasing coordinator, Bill. There's other options here. You could send it back for more info. You could send it back for changes to be made by the requester. Or if you want to make other edits to this, that's an option. There's features to reroute it for more approvals if it needs to be changed in some material manner. When I just simply hit the approve button, it moves it forward to the next person in the queue. In this case, there was another person. It was the PO coordinator. So this transaction has been approved. It's no longer pending the approval of the director, Jane. She's got some other ones that she can work on if she wants. But in this example, I'll just log out as the director. The purchasing guy, Bill, he gets notified, and if he were to just log in, he will see he's got a special extra tab in his dashboard. Specifically, there is this Create PO tab. The Create PO tab is when a company has centralized purchasing and they want the approved requisitions to go there so that the buyers, the purchasing department people can see all the requests that have been approved and are ready to be sourced or ordered depending on your process. So this guy happens to have 4 requests that are in that category, and the monthly supplies request is sitting here. You can see who requested it, the department, also the date it was approved. November 26th is today's date here, and it got sent today. And if he wants to give it a look, he can. If he just wants to create the PO, he can, because it's been approved. It's eligible to be converted to a purchase order. But since Bill has not previously looked at this, the admin here, the purchasing guy, he's going to give it a good once-over. So he sees the status of this purchase request is approved. It's from Joe to buy from this vendor, and if he wants to just kind of rubber stamp it, he can, or he can potentially just double check, make sure that sufficient quotes were received and attached. He can see that the director says it's fine, the manager says it's fine, and he's giving it a full once-over. He could call the vendor and make sure everything's in stock. Whatever his job is, this gives him tools to do it better because he's got visibility and communication at his fingertips. Maybe he adds a comment, I'm going to create the PO and place the order. So he puts a friendly comment there. That way Joe knows what's going on, and he hits this Create PO button, unless he wanted to take other action. When I hit the button to create a purchase order from a fully approved purchase request, the system will assign a purchase order number. There's some there's some logic around the PO number. You can have a prefix. You can usually the system just assigns it unless you need some exception. And this requisition has now been assigned purchase order 1118. And if you click on the PO number at this stage, you can go ahead and see it. So we have a document called a purchase order from the Endeavour company to buy from the vendor Advanced Office Systems for those items that were requested and approved. And this purchase order can be printed. You could see who requested this, who approved it, have terms and conditions, T's and C's. Different terms and conditions can be added if needed. You can print it, you can email it, you can cancel it, and you can even change it with the change order. And it's a really nice change order feature because it lets you do change requests, get those requests approved, and once approved, it'll update the PO with the changes. And this PO can either get automatically put into Dynamics GP as a purchase order, or if you don't use purchase orders in GP, it just keeps it here in our system in Fraxion, and then later we would do the receiving and or the invoice. If I wanted to send this by email, I can do so by hitting the email button. And you could send this to the vendor along with the applicable supporting documentation and just go ahead and send this off to your supplier to place your order. We also have something, it's called vendor punch-out. I'm not sure if you heard of vendor punch-out, but that happens to be electronic ordering. So you can actually go to Amazon.com and build out your shopping cart, or you can go to Office Depot, Staples, Dell. All these different vendors have support for vendor punch-out, and it creates the ability to connect to their catalogs electronically, push those items into the request, get it approved, and once approved, order it electronically. So there's some nice automation around vendor punch-out. I'd be glad to follow up with you on if you're interested. I went ahead and just emailed this PO to my vendor to place the order, and then the vendor will receive the purchase order by email. Typically, they'll confirm it. This guy, Bill, the buyer, can go ahead and, if he wants, just go back into the transaction, and you can see the history here where it shows it was created. It got submitted about 14 minutes ago by Joe, approved by manager, approved by director about 5 minutes ago, and then the buyer went ahead and said he was going to create a PO and order it, and then you could see he emailed it off to his vendor a minute ago. So all that history is a great audit trail, communication, and otherwise to keep everybody in the loop. You could add other comments. This will be here next Tuesday. So you could kind of just ad hoc comments can be added right there into that notes field, and then it will also I have a couple browser windows open. So Joe will also be alerted when there is a comment added there. So the requester can add comments as well as the buyer, and then they can communicate with each other about the details. I've logged back in as Joe Requester because he was the guy who asked for the supplies. His requisition got converted to a PO once it was approved, and it's now sitting in his open purchase order tab, also called the receiving tab, where he can see purchase order 1118. The status is posted. That means the requisition was posted into a purchase order, but nothing's been received. He could use the receive option here if your company wants to do receiving. This is not a required step, but it's an optional step if you want to help facilitate the three-way match of the invoice with the PO and the receiving. So those three items that we ordered have been ordered. There's the quantity ordered, and then nothing's been received yet, and there's still items to be received, and you have an open purchase order here of $5,520. And if you would like to confirm when the goods come in, there's an option to just attach a copy of the scanned or electronic packing slip, confirm the date of the receipt, and then put in the quantities received into the quantity field. So you can confirm what you've received quantity-wise. If you received everything, there's a receive everything option here. There's also, usually the cost would not get changed at this point because it gets pulled from the PO. Everything gets pulled from the PO, so that you just really need to put in the quantities unless there's any adjustments that are needed. And when you hit save, it'll generate a receiving transaction. So Joe has now created this receiver for $5,520 worth of stuff. He didn't attach his packing slip, but he could have, and he still can. We can make that required if you want. And now it shows that he's received everything and there's nothing remaining to receive. And at this stage, it's all been requested, it's been approved, it's been ordered, it's been confirmed received. The system can also send a notification email off to the accounting department letting them know that the goods have been received. So this is an email that went to AP letting them know that the PO has been fully received, and the packing slip would be attached if he had done that. And if you're using purchase order processing in Dynamics GP, this receipt will automatically get created as a receipt against the purchase order that we previously sent to GP. If you're not using purchase order processing, this receiver just stays right here inside of Fraxion. And again, this is PO 1118. So when accounting gets the invoice, they can come in here and, well, they could either go straight into GP and match the invoice if you're using purchase order processing. If you're not using purchase order processing inside of GP, then they would come into Fraxion E. They could put in the PO number there, and they could look it up because the invoices will typically have the PO number on them. If not, you could look it up other ways. And when you pull up the purchase order and you want to match the invoice, there's a couple of ways this can be done depending on your company's process. One option here is to just go to the receiving screen and then receive in the invoice. You can attach a copy of the invoice, whether it be scanned or electronic. There's also a way to email invoices directly into the system if that's desirable. I'm just browsing and uploading it for this example. So I attached an invoice. I put in the invoice number and the invoice date, and then everything else will automatically flow from the purchase order and the receiving. So if I want to match the invoice with what's been received, I would just select the receipt that was done. That populates the quantities received. The cost got defaulted from the purchase order. The GL codes and coding got defaulted from the PO. If I hit save here, it's just going to save all the invoice data that has been captured, and I will now be navigated to the receiving screen here where I can see that the AP person, Happy in this case, she just plugged in the invoice number and the date. Everything else got auto matched, and this is a $5,500 invoice with the packing slip, or in this case the invoice attached. That's that paper clip, so you can see the attached invoice that I uploaded. And at this stage, if I would like to create this transaction over to Dynamics GP, I can just hit the checkbox to post it, and you can post it. It's essentially exporting the invoice data into Dynamics GP as a voucher in the payables management module, and that can be put into a new batch or put into an existing batch. So I went ahead and just hit post. That creates the AP transaction over to GP, and now it lives in Dynamics. It's the next voucher there, and you'll be able to just run your voucher batch lists and post vouchers in GP, create your payments and cut your checks or do your EFTs. Once it gets paid in GP, there's another feature here to show you the payments. This is like a bonus feature. It'll show you the check number and the transaction dates and the transaction amount. So users can cut back on their calls to accounting about the vendor payment status, and it'll just be shown here as a report once it's done. So that's the rec to PO to receipt and invoice process. I know we're running towards the end of the time. I just want to briefly touch upon this great search feature to point out that we do have the ability to query the data through various parameters. You can search by different statuses. You can get results here and export them to Excel. All these columns are sortable, so if you wanted to look up something or run some ad hoc reports, you can sort by department or requester or vendor or item by GL code, and at the line level you can also sort any of this. Somewhat similar to to Smart List Builder in GP. Our search and export feature is very flexible and robust. There's also some standard PO reports in the reports menu where you can run requisition reports as well as purchase order reports. It uses SSRS as the engine for this particular reporting tool. So we have some great features there as well. To the extent I showed you a template and copying it, if you were going to do one from scratch, I'm not going to do it today in the interest of time, but just to give you the idea, if you wanted to make a new request, you click New Request here, and then you set up your request header, you add your item details, you confirm the shipping, you review, you submit for approval, and you can pick the type of request, whether it's an invoice that you're doing, whether it's a non-PO invoice. If it was an expense report, you can select an expense report from the menu here. It just depends on what types you have available in your company. And then you add your data and you submit, and it goes through a similar process to what we just saw. With that all said, there's also an administrative interface. I'm going to spend 1 minute on the administration and then hand it back over to Scott at Endeavour. Under the administration, I'm just giving you an idea here that to configure the system, we typically have it connected to the corresponding Dynamics GP company under company setup. Then we help you set up your department list, your approval levels, your request types, and then assign your users into their appropriate roles. There's a lot of checkboxes and options here that are available, and there's also some options in the accounting tab where you can approve new vendor requests. You could set up electronic integrations with vendors to punch out. You can add item catalogs or just connect to GP items. So there's lots of great features built into the administration to generate approval workflow and other options. With that said, I'm going to pull back to the Endeavour slide here and just maybe hand it back over to Scott at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Scott Pape. That was a wonderful overview, and I can see a lot of the insights that would be brought up to the surface around vendor rationalization and where are you spending and where can we reduce spending, and the consolidation efforts that many of our larger clients start embarking on in an effort to reduce spend once they get the visibility and maintain the control over the end users. So next steps, before we open up to questions through the chat window, feel free to reach out to our team. James McInnes, a client executive, Steve Ewing, director, or Trish Fortin, who's internal and client relationship manager. We're here to help provide the right introductions into Scott and his team, talk to you about different processes internally within GP or within Business Central. Scott mentioned the purchase order processing capabilities within Dynamics GP, and so if you're not using those, that's definitely, we can help that through the support desk and even get into some of the PO approvals as a first step before you move into a more mature product and all-encompassing product such as Fraxion, formerly known as eRequester. Scott, thank you very much. Any final parting words before we wrap up?
I appreciate everybody spending the time today, and I welcome any follow-up questions that you have through the contacts listed here. Thank you.
Thank you. So within your GoToWebinar interface, there are an opportunity to type in a questions box, and I'll look at those now and read them out to Scott. Otherwise, wrap up and enjoy the rest of your day. First question, Scott, does it support AA codes? So it's analytical accounting within GP.
Yes, Fraxion E has integration with the dimension codes in analytical accounting, and if you would like, you can turn that on and code your line items to the appropriate AA codes to keep track of things that you might be tracking under AA.
Thanks, Scott. And I recall you mentioning earlier that it does work with a multi-entity manager from Binary Stream as well.
That is correct.